folks, so this video is about how I made It's the End of the World as We Know It and I Feel Fine, my REM cover, how I made it, and I'm going to talk about the song, the band, why I made this song, and then how I made it. I'm actually going to get into some technical details, showing you my DAW and the track and how I mixed it all down, which I haven't done before. So it's something that I could probably do more of if folks like that, if you like getting into the nitty-gritty technical details. So without further ado, let's get rolling here. So I'm a self-producing musician. So unless I indicate otherwise, I make all my tracks. I perform them, I record them, I mix them, I master them, and I'm doing all of this in Garageband pretty much right here. So I do my best to get as close to a professional recording as I can. Some info about the song from Wikipedia. The song was released in 1987 on REM's fifth album, Document. The lyrics are a collection of streams of consciousness, and in Michael Stipe's own words, Michael Stipe is the lead singer of REM, the words come from everywhere. I'm extremely aware of everything around me, whether I am in a sleeping state, awake, dream state, or just a day, or in day-to-day life. So that ended up in the song with a lot of stuff I'd seen when I was flipping TV channels. It's a collection of streams of consciousness. And this was from an interview in Q magazine. So you'll hear that in the lyrics, that there's not a lot that ties a lot of these lyrics together. It makes you kind of wonder. It seems like he was dictating a lot of thoughts that just came into his mind. But I do love the way the lyrics flow, and it makes for a very interesting song. There are 4 individuals referenced that have the initials of LB: Leonard Bernstein, Leonid Brezhnev, Lenny Bruce, and Lester Bangs. This was from one of Michael's dreams, where he was at a party where all of these individuals had these initials. So all these people were at a party, all with the initials LB, and that quote was from an interview with Musician magazine. So about the band. REM is one of the first alternative rock bands. They put out a lot of music in the 80s, and I think they were pioneers of really an uncompromising sound. If you listen to the music that they have, the songs they have, this one in particular, it's clear that they were not trying to accomplish anything by mainstream standards, in my opinion. I think that when you listen to their music, they were really trying to do something new and original and do the things that felt great to them. And I think that really laid the foundation for the 90s alternative rock explosion. I think a lot of that has a lot to owe to bands like REM. I was first exposed to this song from the film Independence Day from the 90s, which is one of my all-time favorite films. They put out a ton of music with 15 studio albums total and 6 albums from the period 1983 to 1988. Some of their other hits include Everybody Hurts. This is something I also play sometimes, which I loved when it came out in the 90s. Man in the Moon and Losing My Religion, which was, it has a great song Exploder episode on Netflix. So why did I make this song? I was chatting on Twitter with one of my friends, Pam Schwetz. Shout out to her. I'll link her channel. She does instrumental electronic tracks on YouTube. And she mentioned that this was one of her favorite songs. We were talking about song Exploder and Losing My Religion. And I'd remembered playing this song back in the 90s after I had heard it in Independence Day and thought it would be a really cool song to reproduce. It's quite a classic. You still hear it on the radio every now and again, so it is well known, but it's also very unique, and it was very interesting, and I learned a ton by making it. I also felt like it was very appropriate and cathartic given the events of the recent pandemic. So I definitely feel a lot of that when I perform the song, and when I made it. So it hit home for me. How did I make it? So before I get into this, I'll say that this was way, way harder than I thought it would be. I remembered this song as being a 3 to 4 chord song, which as a guitarist would be simple for me to knock out and show off. But I was horribly wrong. I was probably a little overly focused on the guitar parts, but vocally it was extremely challenging. The bass was really tough to learn and to lay down properly, and the entire production was really tough. It's a very masterfully produced song. It's an amazing production. I found that out when I went through it and tried to dissect it and figure out what all the parts were and how they all sound. There are tons of vocal parts. The bass is all over the place, and even towards the end, I realized that there's even a piano and a flute for just a couple bars in the song. So that was kind of like icing on the cake to me when I realized that I had to put all of this stuff together. So it was masterfully crafted, and I assume on obviously older analog equipment. So a lot of those sounds they're actually a lot harder to reproduce in new software packages and things like that. Sometimes it's harder to reproduce the older sounds and older recordings versus the newer ones where there's a lot more standardization and technologies to sort of aid in reproducing that music. So I recorded, mixed, and mastered all of my songs in GarageBand. I recorded it all in this order. I did the drums first, then the bass, then the guitars, then the vocals, and then I did fills like the flute and the piano. This was the first time that I actually did things in this order. I usually do guitars, or before this, I had usually done guitars, bass, and vocals first because those are the things that I'm most comfortable with. But this time I actually thought about, well, maybe let's just do the drums and the bass first and kind of work from the foundation, the rhythm section up. And that was kind of tough because it was so long before I had a song that was tangible, that sounded good, that I could hear and say like, okay, this is kind of what I can expect it to sound like at the end. I also got a lot of ear fatigue and lost perspective in the process because just once I got to the bass, it was a good amount of work. So I still, even after this, I still try to do things in this order when I record music. I try to do drums, bass, guitars, vocals, and then like fills and kind of like whatever other sort of production or oddities, so to speak, at the end of the track. But what I do differently now is I try to lay down some sort of scratch tracks or just rough versions of each section, so I can start to get an idea for how the whole track is going to sound at the end, early on in the process. So when I need to start making creative decisions, especially for original tracks, this is important because you kind of have this vision, you have this idea of how everything's going to sound when you put them together. But if you just walk through the recording process doing drums, then bass, then guitar, then vocals, it's a little scary because you don't really know what it's all going to sound like until the end. So I do these sort of scratch tracks and kind of try and get a rough draft of how the track's going to look at the end. So this is my GarageBand project for the song It's the End of the World. And so I'll start with the drums. I'll go over this. I have 4 drum tracks here. And this first track is for drum fills, the snare fills and the tom fills. This is, I think it's just tambourine. And then these are the main drum tracks. And I think they're essentially identical tracks, but I increase the amount of drum fills at the end of the song for a bigger climax. So for the bass, I use this Pick Brightener preset, which really helps the bass stand out. The bass is a really big part of the song. I really, really like how it's written. I first started feeling a bit over my head when I started recording the bass, because I had to learn the bass, play along with the track, and then get it all laid down. But it does add a ton of character. I won't say that my bass line is exactly 100% correct, but it's pretty close. You have to listen really closely to hear any differences from the main track. But I did end up leaving out a few fills at the end in the interest of time. But give it a listen and tell me what you think about the bass. So for the guitars, you can see I have 5 guitar tracks, and it's a mix of acoustic and electric sounds, which is similar to the studio recording. I've got kind of this echo, sort of wide, wispy sound for the verses, and then I've got bigger sounds that I plug in for the chorus. And there is a breakdown in the bridge where you've got just basically a straight acoustic sound. So the guitars weren't too tough, and that's probably because I am a guitarist first, and I've known the guitar parts for ages. It was tough trying to get the tones to match the studio recording. I did the best that I could, but there definitely is differences that you'll hear between like the tone of the guitars that I'm using and the studio recording. I'll let you decide which one's better, but it's definitely the original. But I did the best I can, and I am proud of how the guitars sound. Here's the one bass track. Just using with bass, usually you want to just go right up the middle and have a single track. Although I have been experimenting with like LCRing bass tracks as well, which have actually gotten me on newer tracks, which have actually gotten me some really good results. And then here you can see I mentioned there's a flute and there's the piano, and they come in and they leave as quickly as they enter the song. But I did decide to include those parts in the song. It's part of the original recording. I wanted it to be authentic. It was really hard to reverse engineer those sounds and figure out what are the right notes. But I think I got it pretty close, and it definitely adds a lot of character in the middle of the song. So for the vocals, there are 24 tracks in this project, and 12 of them are vocals. And that's all of this stuff from here all the way down to here. There are 6 distinct vocal parts and harmonies, and I have each of them doubled and panned to either side. You can see that they're panned, left to right. And this adds a ton of depth. I'm using this dance vocal preset, which I really like. It adds a lot of brightness and character to the songs. I think it really brings out my voice, and it's great for this sort of song. This preset is not great for like heavier and louder vocals. I will say there have been a few times where I've tried to use it for like a heavier type song, and it's just way too loud, too tinny, and too much of a high end. But for this track, I thought that it worked out very well. I should also mention that this is the first recording I did with this Rode NT1A microphone. Shout out to Alyssa, who goes by the screen name Ascending Music, for helping me out with this. So she sold me this at a very, very reasonable price. And it has also helped me a lot by just being supportive and providing feedback and those sorts of things. So the microphone sounds great. So for my vocal mix, I made it very wide by panning each of these tracks to either side, which is somewhat different from the original track. I think the original track is mostly up the middle when it comes to vocals. But this was a new vocal mixing technique that I wanted to try out. Hard panning, basically identical vocal lines to either side. And I really love the way it sound. I will say one problem with doing mixes like this is that they don't sound great in mono. So I have like a Google Home speaker. It's a single speaker, and the mix doesn't sound great. The levels aren't exactly on target when I listen to it in mono, and that's one thing that I've learned, and I am now doing a lot more mixing and mastering in mono. There's a way to set that on your plugins. I will also say that when I first started recording in GarageBand, most of my mixes were straight up the middle. There was not a lot of panning, not a lot of stereo sound. And I kind of went from that to like the other extreme, where this mix and some of my other mixes, like if you've heard my Killers cover, are very wide, where I'm pushing things off to the side a lot, which makes it a very big sound. But the problem with wide mixes, again, they don't sound great in mono. And it can kind of start to feel like you're swimming in this sort of sea of sound. And you want to be able to make out the key melodies and the vocals so that it gets stuck in your head. So these days I'm starting to use a technique called LCR, where it's kind of like the best of both worlds. You have one vocal track up the middle and then two quieter vocal tracks that are hard panned to either side. And then you can kind of adjust the levels of the hard pan vocals to make it as wide or as narrow as you want it to sound. And I think it really depends on what you're trying to do with the track. Hey, so in summary, this is a really great song from a really great band. I really enjoyed building this track, and I'm proud of the result. I learned so much by doing this. I learned so much about production, the bass lines, the vocal harmonies. I've never done anything this in depth vocally, so I definitely learned a ton from that. And here I'm providing a ton of details and transparency for how I built it. It's the first time I've sort of shown my DAW and how I'm doing a lot of this stuff. So if this interests you, definitely like it and comment on it, and maybe that's something I can do more often. Maybe it's a little too technical and in the weeds, and if so, maybe we'll just sort of leave it at that. But thanks a lot for listening to the track. If you haven't already, find it out on Spotify, find it on Apple Music, it's on YouTube, and of course you can always find me on Twitter, TikTok, or Instagram. That's usually where I spend the most of my time. It's at Pite720. So thanks a lot. Talk to you later.